The kitchen where I grew up used to smell like Sunday morning pancakes and my grandmother's lavender soap, but on that February evening, it reeked of tension so thick you could taste the bitterness in the air. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the cracked linoleum where Vanessa and I now stood like gladiators in an arena neither of us had chosen. "I told you never to go near my things," Vanessa snarled, her face flushed crimson with rage that seemed to radiate from her very core. At 25, my sister had perfected the art of fury, her hands clenched into weapons, her voice pitched at a frequency that made the windows seem to vibrate. "I didn't touch anything," I replied, my voice steady despite the familiar knot forming in my stomach. I clutched the glass of water I'd come for, the condensation slipping between my fingers like the piece that was rapidly evaporating from the room. I haven't even been upstairs today, but logic had never been Vanessa's strong suit, especially when she was spiraling. She'd been unemployed for 8 months now, each rejection letter feeding the monster that lived just beneath her skin, and I, apparently, was the perfect target for her frustration. "Liar." The word exploded from her lips as she lunged across the kitchen. What happened next unfolded in slow motion, each second stretching like taffy. Her shoulder connected with my chest, slamming me backward against the refrigerator with enough force to rattle the condiment bottles inside. But it was her elbow, sharp, precise, devastating, that found my ribs with surgical accuracy. The crack was audible, not loud, but unmistakable, like a dry branch snapping underfoot. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence that followed, bouncing off the walls that had witnessed too many of these explosions over the years. Pain doesn't always announce itself with drama. Sometimes it creeps in quietly, then builds to a crescendo that steals your breath and buckles your knees. The glass slipped from my hand, shattering against the floor in a symphony of destruction that seemed to punctuate the moment perfectly. "Mom," the word tore from my throat as I slumped against the refrigerator, one hand pressed against my side where fire was spreading through my ribs like spilled gasoline meeting a match. "Something's wrong. I can't breathe properly." From the living room came the sound of our mother's perpetual companion, the television. A cooking show was playing, the cheerful narrator explaining how to fold perfect dumplings while my world crumbled 20 feet away. "Oh, honey, not this again." Mom's voice drifted through the doorway, saturated with the kind of exhaustion that comes from years of willful blindness. She didn't move from her position on the couch, didn't even turn down the volume. "You two need to stop this constant drama." I stared toward the hallway, waiting for her to appear, to see the way I was holding myself together with trembling hands, to notice that something was genuinely wrong this time, but the footsteps never came. "She didn't mean it," Mom continued, her tone suggesting I was overreacting to a paper cut rather than struggling to breathe. "Don't be so dramatic, sweetheart, and don't even think about making this into something bigger than it is. That girl is finally getting her life together." Vanessa stood over me, her rage already cooling into something resembling satisfaction. There was no apology in her eyes, no recognition of what she'd done. Instead, she smoothed her hair and adjusted her shirt as if she'd just finished a workout rather than assaulted her younger sister. "It's probably just bruised," Mom called out when I mentioned the possibility of a broken rib. "Take some ibuprofen and stop ruining everyone's evening." That night, I lay in my childhood bedroom, the same room where I'd once dreamed of escape, of college, of a life where my worth wasn't determined by how quietly I could absorb abuse. Every breath was a reminder of what had happened, a sharp stab that radiated through my chest and up my spine. I held my phone in the darkness, thumb hovering over the emergency contact screen, but what would I tell them? That my unemployed sister had snapped and my mother thought it was no big deal? That I was 23 years old and still living in a house where violence was met with indifference? The truth was more complicated. I didn't have health insurance. Mom had dropped me from the family plan the day I turned 18, claiming it was time for me to learn responsibility. I didn't have savings either, not when every dollar I earned from my part-time job seemed to evaporate into family emergencies that always somehow benefited Vanessa. Those emergencies had a pattern. Vanessa needed money for job interview clothes, for networking events, for the endless parade of opportunities that never quite materialized, and somehow, I was always the one expected to sacrifice, to understand, to support her journey while my own dreams gathered dust. The next morning brought no apologies, no acknowledgement of what had transpired. Vanessa hummed while making coffee with the expensive beans I'd bought, wearing the silk blouse that had been my birthday gift to myself before she'd borrowed it indefinitely. "You bruise so easily," she commented with a smirk, noticing how carefully I moved, like a ripe peach. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away more effectively than the injury had. This was my sister, the person who was supposed to protect me, who had once braided my hair and shared secrets under blanket forts. Now she stood in our kitchen, sipping my coffee, wearing my clothes, and laughing about the pain she'd caused me. But as I sat there, something fundamental shifted inside me. Maybe it was the physical pain making everything clearer, or maybe it was simply that I'd finally reached my breaking point. For the first time in years, I truly saw the situation for what it was. I was not the problem. I had never been the problem. That afternoon, while Vanessa was out at another networking event, I locked myself in the bathroom and documented everything. The bruising was spectacular, deep purples and blues radiating outward from the point of impact, yellow-green edges marking the boundaries of the damage. I photographed it from every angle, recorded videos of how the pain affected my breathing, my movement. I also set my phone to record the next time Mom dismissed my concerns. "Don't call the police." Her voice came through crystal clear on the audio file. "It'll go on her record, and she's still trying to get hired somewhere decent." The irony wasn't lost on me. Vanessa's future was precious, worth protecting at any cost. My present pain was inconvenient, worth dismissing with pharmaceutical solutions and accusations of attention-seeking. 3 days later, I limped into an urgent care clinic, paying with a credit card I couldn't afford to use. The doctor who examined me was professional but concerned, raising an eyebrow when I claimed I'd fallen down the stairs. "Fractured rib," he confirmed, pointing to the X-ray that made the injury undeniably real. "You'll need to take it easy for several weeks. Any trouble breathing, come back immediately." I nodded, clutching the printed report like a lifeline. For the first time since that night in the kitchen, I had something concrete, proof that my pain was real, that what had happened to me mattered. The timing of my revelation couldn't have been more perfect. Vanessa had finally landed an interview at Morrison Associates, a prestigious marketing firm downtown. She'd been preparing for weeks, treating the opportunity like her personal salvation. "They're looking for fresh talent," she gushed over dinner, her enthusiasm infectious enough that even Dad looked up from his phone. "Someone with vision, with authenticity." I watched her practice her answers to interview questions, observed how she'd reinvented herself on paper, embellished experiences, inflated responsibilities, created a version of herself that bore little resemblance to reality. She'd even listed Dr. Patricia Carmichael as a reference, conveniently forgetting that she'd publicly humiliated the woman on social media 2 years earlier. The night before her interview, Vanessa left her laptop open on the dining room table, a careless mistake that revealed everything I needed to know. Her resume was a masterpiece of fiction, her portfolio carefully curated to hide the gaps and failures that defined her actual experience. I took photos of everything, then made a decision that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. I called Morrison Associates. "This is regarding Vanessa Chin," I told the HR representative, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I'm her sister, and I believe there are some things you should know before tomorrow's interview." I didn't lie, I didn't exaggerate. I simply told the truth, about the assault, about the falsified references, about the pattern of behavior that my family had spent years covering up. I sent the medical report, the photographs, the audio recording of Mom's dismissal. "This is the person you're considering representing your brand," I concluded. "I thought you should have all the information before making your decision." The next morning, Vanessa left the house wearing a new blazer and the necklace our grandmother had left me in her will, another thing that had somehow become hers because she'd wear it more often. She was radiant with confidence, practically glowing with the certainty that her life was finally about to change. She returned by noon, her face pale and drawn, her confidence shattered like the glass she'd made me drop days earlier. "Someone sabotaged me," she announced, throwing her purse across the living room with enough force to knock over a lamp. "They knew everything, about the references, about..." She trailed off, unable to say the word assault out loud. Mom immediately went into protection mode, wrapping Vanessa in the kind of unconditional support she'd never offered me. Who would do such a thing? This is obviously some kind of misunderstanding. But Vanessa's eyes had already found me, standing quietly in the hallway. "You," she whispered, and in that single word, I heard years of resentment finally finding its target. "Funny how the truth has a way of coming out," I replied, surprised by how calm I sounded. The explosion that followed was everything I'd expected and more. Plates were thrown, accusations hurled, tears shed, but not by me. For the first time in my life, I watched the chaos from the outside, protected by the clarity that comes from finally understanding your own worth. Over the next week, the dominoes continued to fall. Vanessa was not only rejected by Morrison Associates but blacklisted from their entire network. Word spread quickly in her industry, HR departments talk. especially about candidates who come with documented evidence of violent behavior and fraudulent applications. Meanwhile, I'd been busy gathering evidence of another kind. Every loan Mom had requested, every emergency that had drained my accounts, every time my money had been redirected to fund Vanessa's lifestyle, I had records of all of it. The legal aid clinic I contacted was very interested in my case. Financial abuse within families is more common than people realize, the attorney explained, and yes, we can help you recover what was taken. But my biggest revelation came when I finally called the lawyer handling my grandfather's estate. The house we all lived in, the one Mom claimed to own, had actually been in my name since I was 18. Grandpa had never trusted Mom with property, so he'd set up a trust that transferred ownership to me on my 21st birthday. The inheritance Mom had claimed vanished had been quietly accumulating interest for years, more than enough to buy out the remaining mortgage and secure my future. The day I served the eviction notice was the day everything changed forever. I placed the legal documents on the kitchen counter next to a copy of my medical report, a simple statement of fact that spoke louder than any accusation. "You can't do this," Mom whispered when she found the papers, her voice trembling for the first time in years. "I just did," I replied. "Don't worry, I gave you 30 days. Vanessa tried to lunge at me again, but this time I didn't flinch. I had documentation, witnesses, legal backing, and most importantly, I was no longer afraid. The 30 days passed in a blur of desperate attempts at manipulation. They tried guilt, anger, bargaining, everything except the one thing that might have made a difference, a genuine apology. Instead of remorse, I got justifications. "She was going through a rough patch. You've always been too sensitive. Family should stick together." But never once did they acknowledge what they'd done to me, or accept responsibility for the years of damage they'd inflicted. On moving day, they left without saying goodbye. Vanessa clutched 2 garbage bags of belongings while Mom screamed about injustice and favoritism. Dad couldn't even look at me, as if his shame was too heavy to carry upright. When the house finally fell silent, I stood in the hallway and listened to the sound of peace. No slamming doors, no raised voices, no eggshells to walk on, just quiet. I turned Vanessa's old room into an art studio, the dream I'd been told would never pay bills becoming the centerpiece of my new life. The scholarship I'd deferred to help my family was still available, waiting for my return. Months later, as I prepared for graduation, this time without the sabotage and interference that had derailed my first attempt, I received a message on LinkedIn from someone asking if I'd really ruined my sister's life just to get ahead. My response was simple: I didn't ruin her life, I rebuilt my own. She just got caught in the debris of what she destroyed. At graduation, I wore grandmother's necklace, the one that had always been meant for me. As I walked across the stage to accept my diploma, I whispered a promise to the girl who had once absorbed every blow, every insult, every dismissal in silence. "This one's for every time we were told to stay quiet." The applause wasn't thunderous, but it didn't need to be. For the first time in my life, I was holding the pen, and the story I was writing finally belonged to me. Friends, what do you think of this story? Write your opinion in the comments. Would you like more stories? Don't forget to subscribe Revenge Radar and hit the bell button so you don't miss any videos. See you in next video.